It is such an unbelievable pleasure, and has been an unbelievable pleasure for the last few days, to be here with you all. An opportunity like this to be amongst people who take so seriously their stewardship of the hearts, the relationships, the well-being of others, and to do so in the name of the Holy Trinity. It's just been an incredible spirit, and I, like I said, I feel very grateful to have been invited to be part of this. I'm also quite humbled after 2 days of listening to all the presentations to be here on the tail end of things, trying to bring it in for a landing is a bit of a daunting task, but I'm going to count on your graciousness and God's economia to kind of keep the thing together. What I'd like to do today is just talk a little bit about how as a clinician and as a supervisor of clinicians, I have found the road to helping people be helped out by some clinical theories, but how no clinical theory has really gotten me to where I would hoped it would have gotten me to in terms of my own effectiveness or the effectiveness of my students. And how what I end up returning to time and time again is Orthodox rhythm and Orthodox theology and Orthodox practice as the container. I think Philip was talking about the non-specific factors of healing psychotherapeutic practice, and the church has been the container for those non-specific factors for a long, long time. I couldn't believe that we were here. The timing was during the Feast of the Three Hierarchs, who were the doctors of explaining in human terms Trinitarian theology. When I went to seminary for the first time, those of you who've been to the seminary know we do silly things there sometimes, and trying to come up with great metaphors for the Holy Trinity sometimes is one of those things, and we kicked around all kinds of them. And so somebody would say, oh, it's like the three phases of water. It's like gas and liquid and ice. They're all very different, but they're made of the same thing. And we'd look at each other and go, oh, that's a good one. Good metaphor. And somebody else would say, oh no, it's like genetically identical triplets. They're all different, but they're the same stuff. And they go, oh yeah, it's a good one. Good, Trinity. But when I first read some of the work of Metropolitan Kallistos Ware about the ways in which the theology of the Trinity was actually a call to loving service and to press against oppression and against brokenness in the world and to try to bring wholeness and healing, then the theology of the Trinity really, it was a transformative experience for me, and it felt like a huge piece of the foundation for the call that I had vaguely felt to go to the seminary was in place. It was a call to service. So I want to start with something that Metropolitan Kallistos wrote. He writes, God the Trinity is thus to be described as three persons in one essence. There is eternally in God true unity, combined with genuinely personal differentiation. The term essence, substance, or being, ousia, indicates the unity, and the term person, hypostasis or prosopon, indicates the differentiation. Let us try to understand what is signified by this somewhat baffling language, for the dogma of the Holy Trinity is vital to our own salvation. I would add to that two things from a clinician's perspective. The dogma of the Holy Trinity is vital to our effectiveness in helping couples find their way in the difficult journey of marriage. And the dogma of the Holy Trinity has its tendrils, has its branches in some of the most unlikely places. And what I'd like to try to talk about today is how I have found some of those tendrils in a couple of particular psychological theories that I and my colleagues utilize at the Danielson Institute in our work with couples and with families. This conception of unity and personhood, of a wholeness and of distinct personhood in the persons of the Trinity, is radically consistent with modern conceptions of human attachment, cognitive neuroscience, systems theory, and relational models of depth psychology. And I will say a little bit about each of those over the course of the talk. As Metropolitan Gerasimos and Deacon Stephen have shared so eloquently with us, Trinitarian theology is the starting and ending point for discussions of healthy marriage and healthy personhood in an Eastern Orthodox context. Since my professional identity is primarily clinical, as a psychotherapist for persons, couples, families, groups, clergy families, and as a teacher and supervisor of those who are trying to learn to be practitioners of psychotherapy, over the 25 years or so that I've been doing this, what I've tried to do is locate the theory and the technique that would allow me to be the most effective practitioner and teacher. And I hope I have a few more years to keep looking, but at this point I have found neither the theory nor the technique. What I have never stopped coming back to, however, is Trinitarian theology. As I was leaving the seminary, after my final year, my senior interview was done, and I was packing up and getting ready to go to Boston University's Pastoral Psychology program, Father Kalivas stopped my car. My wife and I were driving out, literally, and he stopped the car. And those of you who know Father Kalivas, he is an animated man. He made me roll down my window, and he put his hands on the door, and he leaned in and he goes, "Don't lose your faith." I wasn't quite sure what he meant. But now, having spent 25 years or so trying to find the theory and the technique, I think what he meant was, make sure you keep coming home on this, because what you got here is the foundation. And what I have found and hope to share a little bit of today, I find of immense value. But I find it of value because it is infused with a Trinitarian spirit. All right. So, three theories we're going to try and touch on. These are three theories that at the Danielson Institute we're trying to develop a model of relational spirituality, which I sit with great satisfaction in my executive director's chair and think, relational spirituality, that's an easy translation for me. That's Trinitarian theology. So I'm going to share three icons and then let you know what the theories are. But these are ways in which I have found in our iconic imagery depictions of these theories. There's Joachim and Anna with the Theotokos, Joachim and Anna with each other, and Abraham and Sarah exercising holy hospitality to the Holy Trinity, to the three angels. And the theories that I'm going to talk about are attachment theory. I've changed the language on the second one. I'm calling it personhood. What it really is family systems theory and differentiation-based psychotherapy. But I've hijacked that and orthodoxized it. And then inter-subjectivity, which I'll have to explain a little bit, but basically that comes from the more relational models of depth psychology, psychoanalytic theory, psychodynamic theory. Attachment, first icon. So every one of us has an attachment history and a style. We all experienced our own version of this. This is an icon of, a look into the kingdom. So my guess is it wasn't always so compelling and warm and contained and tender. But all of us have an attachment history. We learned the most basic lessons about love, intimacy, closeness, trust, and faith through our early experiences of attachment to our caregivers. At the heart of attachment theory is the idea that human beings are created, made, to experience a kind of relational security, as you saw in the icon, and in the context of relational security, the capacity to explore. I said a little bit about this last night, to explore the inner world, to explore the outer world, to explore the spiritual life, to explore God. I read somewhere once that one of the saints said, God loves for us to explore Him. But without relational security, which for human beings is laid down in those earliest relationships, we can't explore. It's interesting, our church architecture, I noticed at St. Paul's, as is true of most Orthodox churches, when we first walk in to the sanctuary, what's the first icon that we take in? The platitera. And what's the platitera doing? Is it just the platitera usually? Christ. And it's what depiction of Christ? Child. Infant. Small child. I think what, in part, Mother Church is inviting us into as we walk in is an experience of relational security that starts with mother and child, that communicates a level of safety. Welcome in. You're safe, but it doesn't stop there. It beckons us in, and as we move in and we get more towards the center of the sanctuary, then what do we encounter? The Pandocator. The exploration. But there's in attachment terms, there's no way to enter deeply into the mystery of the Holy Trinity and to even begin to take that in without the relational security that starts. And so our architecture itself is a depiction of attachment. John Bowlby, who's the father of attachment theory, cast attachment in biological and evolutionary terms. He said it was a biological imperative. Infants will die without attachment. You could give them everything they physically need, but without emotional attunement, something called failure to thrive kicks in, and it is a lethal condition if it perpetuates. We know this from orphanages and infant studies. And I love it when I hear the word evolutionary when talking about psychological theory, because for me I translate that into it's ontological. It's built into the human species. And in our anthropological terms, it's built in by our Maker. So attachment, as I understand it, is built in. So what comes of attachment? One of the most important things, our brains, different people talk about this differently, but the most workable model that I've heard, our brains are triune, they're threefold. We have a reptile brain, which controls our most basic functions, our nervous system, our fight-flight response. It's our survival mechanism. It keeps the organism regulated and moving. We have a limbic brain, which is our brain that is attuned to emotion, to pleasure, to pain, to contact, to relationship. It also has this amazing capacity to read what's going on in another person and to analyze it. And it's trained to do that in the early context of development. Because you think about it for survival, if we can't tune in and understand what we've got across from us in terms of a human contact, there's no way to establish the kinds of rhythm and attunement that are necessary for human beings to thrive. So the third part of our brain is the newest part of the brain, and it's called the neocortex. And it's located behind our foreheads, and it helps us organize, problem solve, develop creative ideas. And there are connections amongst the three, but each of them's kind of got its own thing going on. And in some of the language that we hear in the monastic writings about bringing the heart and the mind together, I think what we're going to find in cognitive neuroscience research is that there are the pathways for that understanding laid down in us by virtue of the way we're made. It's not just, and I would guess that many of the early mothers and fathers of the church would say, oh yeah, it's physically mediated thing. Well, it is. We're finding out that it's physically mediated. So, attachment gives us the capacity to regulate our emotions. Emotions, again, are a very physically experienced thing. In the context of parental attunement, which is, in the earliest parts of parenting, an infant has no way to differentiate for us, in words, what the problem is. And different cries, different sounds mean different things. But it's up to attuned parents to figure out, is that I'm hungry, I'm in pain, I have a stomach ache, I'm uncomfortable, my diaper's dirty, I'm tired, I'm afraid. Those can all, the distinctions amongst them can be minimal. And so it's parental attunement that starts to help the parent respond to the right thing in the child. And the child then learns that it can communicate in increasingly sophisticated ways what it needs. You do that 100,000 times over the first 10 years, and you've got a child who is not afraid of their inner life or their emotional life because it's been attuned to over time. And there are always misses, there are always ruptures, there are always disconnections. It's not getting it right every time that's important. It's the process. It's the getting stuck, as Philip would say, and working out of the stuckness that teach us who we are and give us confidence that we are secure and that we can then explore the world. I could do a whole day's workshop on these different attachment styles, but I'm just going to quickly go through them and then give you a quick example of attachment gone awry. So what John Bowlby and his students and helpers, Mary Ainsworth, Mary Main, came up with were some ideas about the ways in which good enough attachment takes place and looks, and ways in which misaligned attachment affects children and subsequently adults. Secure attachment is the foundation for subsequent exploration. The reason for that is because a securely attached individual has the capacity to regulate their emotions, has the confidence that dysregulated emotion can be brought under control and soothing, and can kind of get back on the horse with regularity. It's not that securely attached people don't get upset. In the research, when a securely attached child had their caregiver walk out of the room, they lost it. They cried, they screamed, they threw a fit. But when that attachment figure came back in, there was an intense and quick reestablishment of security, followed by renewed exploration. In angry and passive attachment styles, which they termed ambivalent or anxious attachment, there was what we call a preoccupation with the presence of the relationship. Insecurely attached children who are either angry or passive rarely or only in small ways engage in that exploration. What they found is more often than not with their attachment figures, they stayed very close to them and either fought for connection or in a kind of a sad giving up way, passively gave way to the lack of attachment. But the result of this was no exploration or very little exploration of the environment. If you imagine a 2 or 3 year old child, when we talked about this a little in Austin at Father Vasilios' church, that when you think of a 2 or 3 year old child who's in a new space and is securely attached, what do? They start to wander. And you'll see them if Carrie's mom over there, they'll do this number. Always looking, but exploring too. And if something frightens that child, they'll go running back. The angry and passively attached kids would never leave the circle. Then later in the development of this theory, Mary Main came up with a 4th category, disorganized attachment. And for these kids, the caretaker was both the source of security and a source of danger. What they found is these parents typically were either abusive to the children, but still their main attachment figure, or these parents were traumatized themselves and therefore didn't have that capacity to attune to the child in the way that they need to read their signs. Their limbic system was so tweaked, which is what trauma does to our limbic systems. They were so emotionally dysregulated, their limbic system couldn't tune in to their children. And so the children would do bizarre things like run as fast as they could halfway to the parent and then fall down on the ground. Or the parent would walk in and they'd look at the parent and they'd go run themselves into the wall. They call that disorganized attachment. What we need to keep in mind is every couple who comes to us has their own attachment history. And we need to account for where they are in this world of attachment if we're going to understand how they're relating to each other and how they're relating to us. That's number one. Number two is we all need to recognize our own attachment history and style. Because when we encounter it in the other, if the negative aspects of it resonate in a way, we will become emotionally dysregulated. We won't be able to tune in to the subtle signs, and we'll have to find a way to get our emotional balance. So this whole thing about attachment is both crucial in terms of an assessment function, but it is crucial in terms of a self-reflection and self-knowledge function. Okay, so the one last thing I want to say about attachment before the film clip. Attachment orients us to strangeness. That relational security is a way that a child learns how to orient themselves to the new, to the strange. And in Greek terms, it's whether it's philoxenia, where we become friends of the stranger, or whether the stranger becomes echthros, or enemy. And what children do is they read their environment, and primarily they read their attachment figures to understand what's safe and what's not safe. And when somebody new comes into the house and that person gets a big warm bear hug and love because they are a safe person, it takes secure children about 30 seconds to want to get in on the action and meet this new person. If somebody comes into the house and it's a meter reader and we don't know this person and the parents are a little shady and they're asking for ID at the door, the kids will not even emerge. This and those styles continue throughout life. We need relational security in order to explore, in order to be hospitable, in order to have hospitable hearts and discerning hearts. We need to have that early experience, to be taught, our limbic systems to be taught what's safe and what's not. When our couples encounter each other, this stuff is all cooking. All right. So I just want to share one quote real quick. This is a lead-in to the clip. So Stephen Mitchell, who's a relational psychoanalytic writer, writes, "The superordinate need of the child is not for pleasure or need gratification, but for an intense relationship with another person. If the caretakers provide opportunities for pleasurable experiences, pleasure is sought. Not as an end in itself, but as a vehicle for interaction with others. If only painful experiences are provided, the child does not give up and look for pleasurable experiences elsewhere, but seeks pain as a vehicle for interaction with the significant other." I want to say that again. If a child's early attachment history is filled with painful attachment, as they get older, unless there's some change and holding, they don't shake their head and say, you know what, my troubled background, I need to go find the healthiest possible intimate relationships I can. Or they or we might say that, but saying and doing are about 20 different things in this case. And the pain of the early relationships gets implanted as the vehicle for closeness. And so a lot of the people that we will see in couples therapy are going to be coming to us and saying, I was looking for this to be good. I did not want to relive this pain in my life. I didn't want to have to encounter the kinds of abandonment or conflict or anger or sadness that I had in my family growing up. And here I am. And their spouse will say, I never wanted to end up in a situation where my anger was ruling the relationship. But here I am. It's because the pain is imprinted as closeness. All right, so preoccupation with the relationship. Now, as pastoral, psychological consultants and experts, I want you to watch this clip and see it through the lens of attachment. And when it's done, we won't spend a lot of time talking about it because we have other things to go to. But if you could just throw out a couple of attachment ideas based on what we just talked about after watching this.
Are you awake?
No.
Yes, you are. Will come to California with me.
What?
I want you to come to California with me.
You sure about that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but how do you know?
I don't know. I just know.
Yeah, but how do you know?
I know because I feel it.
Because that's a really serious thing you're saying. I mean,
I know.
you could be in California next week and, you might find out something about me you don't like and, maybe you wish you hadn't said that, but, it's such a serious thing that you can't take it back, and now I'm stuck in California. Someone doesn't really want to be with me, just wish they had a take back.
A what? What's the take back? I don't want to take back. I just want you to come to California with me.
Well, I can't go to California with you, so.
Why not?
One, because I've got a job here, and two, because I live here.
Look, if you don't love me, you should just tell me
I'm
because
not
it's
saying
such
I don't love you.
Why? Why won't you come? What are you so scared of?
What am I so scared of?
Well, what aren't you scared of? You live in this safe little world where no one challenges you and you're scared to do anything else because
Don't
that
tell
won't
me
mean that
about
you
my
have to
world. Don't
change.
tell me about my world. I mean, you just want to have your little fling with, like, the guy from the other side of town. Then you're going to go off to Stanford. You're going to marry some rich who your parents will approve of and just sit around with the other trust fund babies and talk about how you went slumming too once.
Why are you saying this? What is your obsession with this money? My father died when I was 13 and I inherited this money. You don't think every day I wake up and I wish that I could give it back? That I would give it back in a second if it meant I could have one more day with him. But I can't. And that's my life and I deal with it. So don't put me when you're the one that's afraid.
I'm afraid. What am I afraid of? What am I afraid of?
You're afraid of me. You're afraid that I won't love you back. You know what? I'm afraid too. I want to give it a shot and at least I'm honest with you.
I'm not honest with you?
No, what about your 12 brothers?
All right.
No, you're not going. You're not leaving.
What do you want to know? What? That I don't have 12 brothers?
Yeah,
That I'm an orphan? No,
yeah.
you don't want to hear
I
that.
didn't know
no,
that.
you don't want to hear that. You don't
I
want to hear
didn't-
that cigarettes put out of me when I was a little kid.
I didn't know
That they stabbed me. You don't want to hear. Don't tell me you want to hear that.
I hear it because I want to help you, because I
Help
want to be...
me! I got a sign on my back that says "Save me."
No.
Do I look like I need that?
No, God, I just want... I love you. I love you. I want to hear you say that you don't love me. Because if you say that, then I won't call you. And I won't be in your life.
I don't love you.
All right, just a couple observations about this couple. What I certainly wouldn't recommend couples therapy for them at this point. It's just it's too hot. There are too many other things going on. You would need to make sure they're safe and contained in other ways. But if this is the process, if they were to come to us a year or two down the line, what is it we just learned from this that we would really need to know and consider in working with them from an attachment perspective? Two huge things for us to consider as caregivers. Where is their loss? And maybe in some sense, traumatic loss. A 13-year-old girl losing her father. We need to know the story of that. We need to know the impact of that. We need to know what that means and has meant for her. And trauma and physical abuse and abandonment. We need to know where the trauma lives in people, because one of the great contributions of cognitive neuroscience is to help us understand the beating that the limbic system takes in the face of trauma, especially overwhelming trauma early in life. And it can result in this kind of disorganized attachment. Things that as caregivers we can look at, and boy, it's easy to be repulsed by them or to judge them or to see them as evil, but they don't come from nowhere. There's always a story. There's always a story. And we have to be able to tolerate our own discomfort and disgust and fear and use our wisdom and discernment to provide a containment to learn those stories. And a lot of times those stories aren't really tellable in words yet. They're tellable in actions.
As a therapist, I work with attachment theory, and please let me know if this is an appropriate time in this. I do prepare and enrich for premarital couples, and it's a wonderful program. But besides this, I keep thinking more and more about how attachment impacts the unmarried couple like these ones, because it's so important, and many times, as we know, opposites attract, and different opposite trauma can attract, and then people can want to get married for bad reasons and not for really the oneness and the true, connecting with God and living in God. So I'm wondering, what do you think about this, and how would we help these couples understand this before they get married? to prevent divorces and troubles for the future?
That's a very good question. Good time to ask it. So in preparing couples, it's a hard time actually to do the work, but what you want to try to help them at least create space for is this idea of the unconscious selection of mate. That each of us, based on our attachment histories, is going to seek out that vehicle that we are most accustomed to living with. And if it was a disruptive, chaotic vehicle, then our hearts are going to look for that, even if our head's telling us not to. And so to give young couples an opportunity to think both about the wonderment and perfection of their chosen mate, but also to look within themselves for ways in which the vehicle that they seek for love may carry with it some of the attachment disruptions. And I think both Metropolitan Gerasimos and Deacon Stephen spoke to this idea that our hearts are seeking the fullness of God's love and presence. And in some ways, to seek out something broken from our own histories is a hope to redeem it. It's a wish to change it. It's a movement towards healing and wholeness. It just so easily goes awry that we have to be very careful with that. And goodness knows, probably I am the only one in the room who has chosen a caretaking profession in order to fix things from my own family of origin. I'll own that. But that's just part of the deal. We're seeking wholeness. One more, Philip.
You nicely mentioned that when you look at evolutionary arguments, you interpret that as God's design, and it's internalized. So when you look at now choosing a mate compulsively or based on broken attachment, can we not say the exact same thing? That this is God's design for marriage, that we're going to choose the broken partner because that'll set up exactly what you just mentioned. It becomes the opportunity to face that, face the past in a different type of present. So in a sense, just like evolution, our compulsive choices are actually the design for the context of the healing of marriage. Rather than avoid it or tell couples, don't choose based on that, choose something different.
There are those who would pathologize that phenomenon and call it things like a repetition compulsion. But I think that is really selling short the bigger picture, which is we're made the way we're made for good reason. And we're made to explore, and part of what we do is unless we feel like we're on secure ground to explore, we won't. We'll be cut off from our humanity, and we can't do our part to explore God. And so trying to heal those wounds, I would say, the original story of humanity in Genesis is not a story of unending blissful attachment. It's how exploration went awry and how we've been trying to figure it out ever since. So why would this be any different? And there's great hope in that story as well as... All right, we should probably keep moving. Okay, personhood. I'm going to relate this to a theory of a psychological theory called family systems theory, or differentiation-based couples therapy. The reason I chose this icon, I've seen several icons of Joachim and Anna, and their story is so compelling, so compelling. You saw the first one, where they're with the Theotokos, and they're close, and they're this tight little group, and it's just attachment heaven. There are others, they're like praying hands, I've heard that described. Close, physically close, their cheeks are touching. Another very compelling icon. But then I found this one, where they are standing side by side, but there's distance between them. They are clearly two persons. And their story of redemption, in a sense, they both, as I understand it from the materials that we got yesterday in the Paraklesis, They both came to life with good attachment and with strong families and with strong personhood. And it looked like it was all going their way, but they couldn't conceive. And so it touched off this crisis for them where Joachim experiences the shame and humiliation when he goes to offer his gift. Anna experiences the shame and humiliation of thinking her husband has just left town and maybe going into the desert to off himself. And the wheels have completely come off in terms of who they thought they were going to be. Do they figure it out like that? Is that how they figured it out? Not at first. That was a side effect. That was an outcome of what they did next. This is what they did. They each went and had that solid attachment and internalized sense of who they were. And they thought, and they prayed, and they contemplated, and they stayed still, and they waited to hear what was going to happen. They waited. They got quiet. It would have been so easy in the context of humiliation, shame, to just keep going into action mode, to do the things we do when we're so uncomfortable in the context of shame, to seek out shortcuts to not feel bad anymore. And God knows we got a million of them. But they didn't. They went and they got quiet. And then they realized what they needed to do. And they got this good news that they would conceive a child. They connected to God. They didn't stay isolated. And then, what a story. They come back, they see each other, they go offer their gifts, they go home, they conceive the Theotokos. Unbelievable. But that's the outcome of the story. I think the heroic part of this story is what happened when the wheels came off. Okay, so that's why I like this icon. So in terms of family system theory and differentiation, we're trying to encourage this kind of pattern in the couples that we see. Because a lot of them are going to want to rest on the laurels of who they are and who they've been. A lot of them are going to want to rush to be there. And the hard work of marriage, a crucial piece that really gets underplayed, but I think has been spoken to so clearly and wonderfully today, over this weekend, is this part of it. So what does it look like? So I told you I tried to hijack the whole differentiation thing and call it personhood. I hope you'll bear with me on that. So it means a kind of co-stewardship and co-martyrdom in marriage. That the economy that keeps a marriage alive and close and strong is a shared economy that two people have committed themselves to. And it's a co-martyrdom. It's a co-witness. It's a co-sacrifice. But to say it's a sacrifice for the other person would miss the mark. A lot of times it involves making sacrifices for the other person, but that's not why we sacrifice. That's not why we give up something that we might want. We do it to take care of the marriage. We do it to be stewards of the marriage. And interestingly, these two terms, co-stewardship and co-martyrdom, couples without any or just marginal religious backgrounds, they get this. They like this idea. They like the idea that there is a third thing that they need to take care of because it makes sense to them. And when I tell them about the ones that it makes sense to tell about, when I tell them about the Orthodox wedding service where we sing, where the joyous first dance of the couple around the table is actually hymns to the martyrs, they love that. They laugh. They're like, oh yeah, I can see why they would do that. I wish somebody had told us ahead of time there was going to be more of that. Well, in a sense, the church, in her gentle, timely way, is dropping it in in the midst of a song and a dance. That's pretty wise. So that the couple can come back to it. They may not be ready for it then. It may be more about the song and the dance. But Aegi Martyres is there, and is there the whole time. All right, so some of the things that a caregiver, pastoral caregiver, couples therapist needs to help the couple find new language for in order to establish and validate personhood are: what does commitment mean to them? What is their level of commitment to each other? How do they think about commitment? If you talk to them about, it's like going to a movie. And are they going to go into the movie and get seats in the middle with people all around them where they're in for the whole movie? They're not going to try and get out of there? Are both couples willing to do that? Does one want to sit on an aisle? Does one want to sit in the back by the door? Does one just want to sit out by the concession stand while the other one goes in the movie? Get a sense proximally where they are in relation to this commitment. Commitment issues are huge, and they need to be upfront conversations, because without some sense of that, you could just be spinning your wheels. Disappointment. Metabolizing the inevitable disappointment of marriage may be the most important skill a couple in a long-term marriage is able to embrace. Because believe me, my 23-year-old daughter is here who's not married yet. She's like, Dad, I'm not sure I want to hear all this. But metabolizing disappointment is probably the most important skill, because what it does is it recognizes what's real. And that is not that the other person is such a schmuck or an awful person. It's that each of us came into the relationship with unrealistic expectations of what the other person was going to do for us. And so we have to shift from thinking, this person's going to do it for me and fix me and make it all okay, to this is my co-traveler on the road of life. And we got to look out for each other, but we can't expect one to carry the bigger load. We're in this together, and if we judge each other and break each other down, we can't keep moving down the road. Power and control issues are huge for us as pastoral caregivers and couples therapists to understand. What is each spouse's orientation to power in relation to things like money, status, sex, religiosity, moral goodness? Where does the power sit? And who and how do they negotiate their understanding of where the power sits? One of the great gifts of living in a Western society where women have become equal partners financially and from an opportunity standpoint is we don't have structures of dependency, forced dependency, sitting on us the way they used to. It's not about property anymore. And so the couples really have to find ways to work out a situation within which they have to choose it, because they can also not choose it. The consequences, I'm not talking spiritually here, the consequences secularly for not staying in a marriage aren't nearly what they used to be. So it has to make more sense to be there. And power and control just explodes in the door typically when our couples come in to see us. And so getting a beat on it is crucial. Carrie?
It just dawned on me when we have people coming from different faith backgrounds, how that comes into play. I never thought of it in that way until you just said this. The choice they make about if they get married in a church, which of the two churches will they marry in? And why? Where will they raise their children? Is this more of an issue of power and control, or is this more of an that they've really mutually worked this out together?
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Relationships with family, extended family. Where do we live? How do we spend our money? All these things are the raw material of the ways in which exousia plays out And becoming wise stewards of power is such a crucial aspect of being a human being, of being a steward of God's creation, let alone in marriage. But if it's not present in marriage, the imbalance really can set things teetering. Okay. Responsibility and asynchronous change. I promise that's the last big word I'll try and sneak in. Asynchronous change means when we work with our couples, we can't expect synchronous swimmers in terms of recovery and choices to change and readiness to get better and tolerance of dysregulated emotions. That it can be very choppy, and as couples stewards, what we really want to at least start with is we need to have at least one in the couple who's ready to change. Now, there has to be enough of a commitment on the other to tolerate how it feels to not be changing and to see their spouse changing. But for starters, we need somebody to do something. And I will say that sometimes as a therapist, is the two of you can sit and wait forever for the other one to change, but you're only hurting yourselves in the end, and nothing will happen here unless one of you makes the first move. And you can't do it saying, I'm going to make the first move, but then I'm going to wait and see what you do. It's got to be about personhood. Joachim and Anna came back. They may have had some sense, based on their relationship, that there would be a meeting between them. But each of them came to their own conclusion on their own that they were back in, and they were going to do this and get back in on it. That's what we have to try to enhance in the couples that we see. And deliver the bad news that it ain't going to be like this, and that they can't have the luxury of waiting on the other one. Now, where power and control are too skewed, or where there's some kind of abuse or manipulation, those are deal breakers. But in most of what we see in our couples work, we really have to try to encourage somebody to move, and then we see what happens. Okay, so I want to give you an example of a couple, differentiated couple, and just how hard it is even for the best couples. And this is a great couple. I love this couple. Another Massachusetts couple. I'm a little biased. It's Super Bowl weekend. I'm sorry. But watch these two and their struggle from their differentiated places to work out this painful issue. Let me give you just a snippet of background. It's John and Abigail Adams. John's been called to France as ambassador. Abigail has held down the fort, got the kids through the flu, smallpox, and now he's basically saying they want me to go. Not that that probably doesn't apply to like clergy couples at all, but let's see what John and Abigail have to say.
Abigail. You are not staying. Where is the Congress to meet?
In York, to the west of the city. But it is not to the Congress that I must go. This war will not be won without French money and French ships.
That is Dr. Franklin's affair. He is the commissioner to France.
Yes, there are some concerns about Dr. Franklin's aid.
No.
Congress is asking.
No. John!
I told them that I would not go.
No.
It was my intention to return to the bar, that I cannot support my family,
You
my
cannot
children.
ask this of me.
They would not accept
You
my
cannot.
I am needed in Paris.
You are needed
Abigail.
here, John. Your children require your example. I need you here. Are you to add more years to those we have already spent apart? How can you get me back that time? How can you compensate to me all of those years I cannot get back? Do not rob me of my happiness.
That is not my wish. Abigail, you must know that.
Can you tell me how long, John? How long this time? Tell me that.
I cannot.
There is a cost to love, John. Absence and distance.
Okay, 2 or 3 things, and then we need to get to the third theory. Let me just, one quick thing. That's just how it is, I think. That's good, what they're doing. And it aches to do it that way. So, in our personhood list, can you pull out just 2 or 3 things that you could name that go along with that scenario? Co-martyrdom, disappointment, ferocious disappointment, ferocious. Anything else?
Instead of Abigail just collapsing because of his public responsibility, she's holding her ground and making it very, very clear the cost of his fidelity to country in terms of their family and their own marriage.
Yeah. So part of differentiation is to lay out the terms of what this means to me without being wedded to the outcome, but knowing that it is an expression of integrity and belief. That is hard to do because as the stormy winds blow through a marriage, it can be much easier to either try to accommodate in order to bring the conflict down or to avoid. And our attachment styles play this out all the time. To avoid, to cling, and a differentiated position is one to say, here are the terms for me. I don't expect that to change you, but I want it to influence you and matter to you. And then we'll have to see where we go from there. Very powerful, very powerful. All right, I know our time's moving, so let's go to the third theory. Inter-subjectivity. I said I wasn't going to use any more big words. That's a tough one. I still am trying to figure out what this means. So I think what I'm going to do is go right into the description. But the reason I chose this icon for intersubjectivity is because, first I think it's fascinating that an iconic depiction of the Trinity includes a husband and wife. That's pretty cool. But another thing about it that relates to intersubjectivity is this shows a space. Something happens in this space that is bigger than the sum of its parts. And when people relate from an intersubjective perspective, they are allowing as much as possible each other to be who they are, to be a subject and not to be somebody that I'm trying to define you to be, or I insist that you be, or I force you to be, or I hold you hostage to be, but let you be in order to be. And the sum of the parts of that, when people get to be persons in relationship, it expands, and all of a sudden there's room for the Holy Trinity to infuse that space and for things and for exploration to really start to happen. So let me just give you a couple ideas on this and we'll finish up with a clip. All right. So that space that I'm talking about is another way of thinking about it. It's the marital container. And the degree to which spouses within that container feel themselves to be as freely as much themselves and can figure out for themselves, not in a way that's dependent on their spouse, but figure out a way to be a full person, a person of integrity, a person whose heart is open to who God has created them to be. That creates that space within which then things can happen. The degree to which we start to limit ourselves in order to accommodate or shut down in a compulsive way or in an unconscious way, rather than a wisely chosen way, that space, it's like a tin can that's in a vacuum. It just starts to implode. Pieces of it just start to collapse in on itself. And it leaves no room if it's serious enough. So this metaphor is about creating a space within which personhood can be realized. It's characterized also by a process of rupture and repair. So again, it's back to Genesis. It's not unrelenting connection and life in the Garden of Eden and relational security. The process is one wherein coming to trust one's capacity in a couple to repair the inevitable ruptures becomes the glue of trust for that couple. So that when inevitably these ruptures occur, like John and Abigail experienced, they're going to find their way. She ended up going to France eventually. They got things taken care of, but they got those terms set. Something that characterizes, from an attachment perspective, a limbic system that has been traumatized relationally is the loss of confidence that repair is actually possible. I'll say that this is hugely important in couples work. Something that occurs in the context of traumatically disrupted relationship and attachment is the loss of confidence that repair is actually possible. And this is something as caregivers and as therapists we need to be able to recognize and put into words. We can't change somebody's belief, but sometimes they don't even know they don't believe it. And so naming the fear that repair is not possible. And from an Orthodox Christian perspective, we are, I listen to a lot of Father Hopko's podcasts too, and he says Orthodox theology is Orthodox Stavrology. It's about a faith wherein rupture is at the very heart of who God is and why God has made himself available to us in an incarnate way to occupy all the darkest corners of human experience. Because repair then becomes possible from anywhere, even from the grave, even from the deepest corners of Hades. So from an Orthodox Christian perspective, you're not sharing anything that's not already part of the deal. It's Holy Thursday. But people lose confidence that Holy Thursday actually keeps moving. They get stuck in Holy Thursday. Even though I know even in Holy Thursdays, but we won't go there. All right. So, one of the ways of describing what happens when the space collapses is the couple gets into a pattern of complementarity. And basically what complementarity means is it becomes a zero-sum game. There's only so much oxygen in the container, and if I take it, it takes away from you. Complementarity is a zero-sum game. So if we're with a couple and what we feel like they're telling us is if we don't believe them more than we believe their spouse, just know, because it's going to happen all the time. Just know we're in complementary space, where the belief that is activated is that this is a zero-sum game, there's only so much to go around, somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. That's, by the way, a limbic system experience and a reptilian brain experience. We are wired in the face of shortage to turn complementary, to use only part of ourselves, not all of who God made us to be, but to use only part of ourselves to survive. To see the world as a resource that's limited and to snag what we can. Because if we don't get what we can, we're going down. It doesn't work in marriage. But we have to somehow help couples communicate that. And part of this inter-subjectivity is we have to find a way to create a space within which two subjectivities can be held and not just one. All right, so what are some ways of creating that space? So I just want to read you a little something from a guy named Daniel Shaw, who is a social worker that we've had come visit the Danielson Institute, and he talks about this intersubjectivity complementarity thing. And he writes about the reparative processes. These are the ways of getting that space opened back up again. The reparative processes can instill hope and perhaps even faith in the possibility that disruptions do not have to be catastrophic or terminal, but can be meaningfully repaired, and that one's badness and the badness in others can exist along with and not override and destroy goodness. There's enough room for everybody. How do we do that? How do we teach it? Acknowledging fallibility and vulnerability. Two huge things that couples need to learn how to do. And remember, it may be asynchronous. Who wants to be acknowledging fallibility and being vulnerable if we're not certain it's safe enough to do that and that it's going to be welcomed by our spouse? Well, with no help, it's almost impossible. But guess what? If we're going to be, as Deacon Stephen calls it, midwives, if we're going to be stewards of these, co-stewards of these marriages, then we have to be people who create the space where acknowledging fallibility and being emotionally vulnerable can happen without the guarantee from the other spouse. Then we roll the dice. I think Philip gave a good example yesterday of that happening, and then it paid off. But you had no guarantee that's how it was going to go. You were, as we were saying, out over your skis on that one. But welcome to the life of a couples therapist. Get used to being out over your skis. All right, so acknowledging fallibility and vulnerability. Accountability for doing harm. So we have to own it. We spouses have ridiculously capacity to hurt one another. Probably we're better armed against, it's the perfect war. It's the Cold War potential. Trident missiles on both sides, and we know just where to shoot them, and we got our finger on the button, so we have to be accountable for that. And again, without some help, that can be almost impossible. But midwives and stewards, this is part of what we try to help people do. Apologizing and forgiving, hugely important and complicated and simple and necessary. And when it's done without integrity, can do damage. And when it's done with integrity, it can make people feel vulnerable and ashamed. And retreat, away from it, but vital aspects of couples work. Expressing and receiving gratitude. And to be a Eucharistic and relational entity, gratitude has to be free-flowing. And the idea, even in the midst, and this would not be something that you'd say right away, but you want to get people around to the idea that there's always something to be grateful for. Always. The level of hopelessness people can get into, the despair, can create a limbic experience of no gratitude. But there's more to us than our limbic systems, and in the safety of a container where one's subjectivity can be present, including one's despair and one's hopelessness, it could actually be possible and needs to be possible for that space to invite gratitude, a Eucharistic approach to life. All right, so this is the last clip I'm going to show. It's a movement from rupture to repair. We'll get a couple thoughts about it and then we're done. All right, so a little preview on this. I've shown this clip before. One of my favorite movies of all time. It's about the 1980 USA hockey team. The couple is Herb and Patty Brooks. He was the head coach for that hockey team. You from Minnesota? All right, go. All right, so let's see what happens to these guys.
How much longer are you going to be?
I still got a few more.
Well, I'm going to bed, okay?
Okay.
Oh, Kelly has ballet at 4 tomorrow, and Danny's done with hockey camp at about the same time. Which one do you want to get? Her.
Yeah.
Can you pick up Danny at 4 o'clock?
We got team meetings after practice tomorrow.
Well, I can't be in 2 places at one time.
Well, what about Margie? I thought she was
They're
all
on
set.
vacation.
I don't know, honey. You'll figure it out.
Can you turn that off, please? Please. Herb, this is what happens over the summer. The kids are off doing a zillion different things, and every once in a while, your meetings are going to have to wait.
Come on, Patty.
Well,
I'm coaching a hockey team here. I mean, this is, we already talked about this.
oh, really? When exactly did we have this talk? Because I don't recall being a part of the conversation. What did I say? Was it interesting? We never had this talk. Never.
Okay, what's on your mind?
Nothing.
Oh, you're obviously mad about something. First you're upset because we didn't talk. And then when I try to talk about, I don't know, whatever it is, you don't want to. So, Patty, if you're not willing to...
It's not because we didn't talk. It's because you never even asked. I know what this is about. I know it, and you know it.
What? No, what?
This, what you're doing. Chasing after something you didn't get, that you may never get. What if it doesn't work out, Herb, huh? Are we gonna do this every 4 years? It's okay. Go finish your work. Go.
Hey.
Hey.
You know, ever since I stopped playing, I wanted to coach this team. And this is the only way I know how to do it. It's not the easiest way, I know, for you or the kids, but Patty, I have to do this.
I know you do.
I'm sorry we didn't talk. And I was wrong not to ask. So I'm asking now if you can be with me on this, because it won't mean anything if you're not.
All right, we just have a couple minutes. Can we pick out 2 or 3 things just to name them in relation to what we saw? And what, Michael?
There was 2 things that I saw. One is he acknowledged her pain, and the other is that he owned his half of the street. He took responsibility for the pain that he had caused her. And connecting that to what you were saying about brain physiology, that quiets down the amygdala. And because when that part of the brain is hyperactivated, then the prime objective is to assess and take out threats in the environment. So you saw that the defensiveness went down dramatically. And then that allows for any sort of consensus or reconciliation.
So the space expanded enough for both Patty's pain about this and his own and Herb's vulnerability and fallibility. And you're right, that is mediated at the level of brain physiology. It alters the blood flow in the human creation when we create intersubjective space.
And I'll add to that the part where there's reconciliation, that's a function of the neocortex. When the part of the brain that is the limbic system is activated, the neocortex is shut off. So it is impossible to expect any kind of reconciliation in that moment because they don't have the capacity. The neurons that you need for that are just simply shut off. Once you can quiet down the limbic system, then the neocortex can shut on. And so that being able to contain it in that way is critical to the therapeutic process.
So I want to recommend at the next marriage conference, we have a cognitive neuroscience component for the thing. I think it would actually be really useful and helpful. All right, a couple other.
He laid out his terms.
Yes, he did. And then did it seem like there was enough room for her then to lay out her terms? The first time it didn't. The first time seemed more like a hostile takeover of the space. And you could just feel that can going. But the second one, it expanded. So one more.
Rupture and repair. It was beautiful. And I noticed the, let's say, timeout, how beautifully, how smoothly they took it, and how it was this flow into repair. It was amazing.
Yeah.
To witness.
Yeah, you really get the sense that for Herb and Patty, this was not their first rupture and repair rodeo. They've been down this road before. So a quick aside, a cool part of that story. So you saw the picture of Herb Brooks on the USA hockey team 1960, Squaw Valley. He was actually the last player cut from the active roster in the 1960 Olympics. So he didn't play, he didn't dress, he didn't play. He was home in St. Paul, Minnesota, watching the game with his father. And they're watching the gold medal game that the USA won. And as soon as the game was over, Herb Brooks' father turned to his son and he said, "Well, Herbie, Looks like they cut the right guy. True story. Vulnerability. And she knew that story. She knew that story. Okay. So just as a quick review.
About unfinished business, huh?
he found a powerful way to fight that one. Relational spirituality. It's about attachment. It's about personhood. It's about creating the intersubjective space. In case you all haven't noticed, the process that we've had here over the last 3 days has mirrored that quite remarkably. So, Your Eminence, we appreciate the invitation here to be part of something like that. And to the Center for Family Care, Office of Family Care, for making it possible and being the powerful attachment figures you all are for us to come in here and feel secure enough to explore. So, thank you very much.